All right. Good evening, everybody. First, just for everybody's awareness, we are recording now, and a copy is going to be made available for those who are unable to attend this live session. Next, for the format of tonight's meeting, I'm going to start by introducing our guest, who's then going to describe his organization development and support of uncrewed autonomous and remote systems technologies. After, I'm going to lead a series of introductory high-level questions, after which we'll then open up to a class-wide Q&A session. I do ask that you mute your mics, save all questions to the end, and that you use the hand raise icon to indicate when you do have a question. I will call on each of you with questions in order. And I also want to note that I'm capturing and sharing any online links to important concepts, details, or tools that might be brought up in our discussion tonight. You're going to be able to find that in the video notes or in the discussion area tomorrow. So with that, I am just really thrilled tonight to welcome you to the 14th session of the UNSY Guest Subject Matter Expert Speaker Series. I'm Dr. Brent Twilliger, the Program Coordinator for the Master of Science in Unmanned Systems degree here at Embry-Riddle. I'm also your UNSY 501 instructor. Tonight, we're joined by our guest subject matter expert, Mr. Danny DStirtz. He's been for the last 40 years, he's been in systems development and commercialization, where he successfully launched a number of small businesses, as well as worked at all levels of large and small organizations, from individual contributor and programmer to senior staff positions at companies such as Hughes Aircraft, Northrop, GE Aerospace, and Beckman Instruments. He spent more than 28 years at Lockheed Martin, where he was primarily responsible for adjacent market development. Development experience has included the astro-inertial navigation systems for the SR-71, GPS space and ground segments, Milstar ground segments, second TDRSS ground station, the STGT, visualization and mapping systems that are classified, and other related technology areas. He completed a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from California State University of Fullerton in 1981, and he's also a co-founder and executive vice president of escAerospace US Incorporated. escAerospace has a focus on position navigation and timing, or PNT solutions, in GPS denial, with an emphasis on autonomy and low size, weight, and power, or SWAP, platforms. Tonight, Danny's going to be talking to us about what escAerospace does in the unmanned and autonomous system space, how he sees this technology changing the world around us, and challenges that need to be addressed in the coming years. So with that, I'm going to turn over the mic to Danny.
Gee, thanks, Brett. That was good. I got to read that back to myself once in a while. It makes me smile. Hello, everybody. As I was saying before we got kicked off, please make this interactive. I really didn't create any sort of a presentation to gear the discussion, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about escAerospace, and then during that, please interrupt at any time and continue poking at me with questions, specifically because I'm not totally familiar with your emphasis of this particular course and some of the areas that you might be interested in personally. So escAerospace was founded in 2018. We share brand with a group of ESC companies, mainly in Europe, but the shared brand and shared products under subcontract is really our only formal relationship. There's no holding company. We're not part of a broader escAerospace global. escAerospace was ESC, Evolving Systems Consulting, started as a staffing company basically in Germany, grew, and one of the principals of that company decided to form a aerospace company actually in Prague, Czech Republic. From there, formed another company in Munich, and one of the principals in that company from Munich, Lars Weimer, my partner and co-founder of escAerospace US, decided that the U.S. market was by far the largest market for our potential products and services. I had left Lockheed Martin, had a consulting company of my own for a while, and was just trying to decide what I was going to do when I grew up. And Lars and I met and founded escAerospace. We were lucky enough to be revenue flowing before we incorporated. We had to go online, form our company, run to the bank and open a checking account so our first NIST customer could fund us for a challenge that we won for extended flight time UAS. We had to lift 45-pound payload and under 50-pound total weight and fly for as long as we could. We were one of 8 companies were selected. We had a little bit of a fail in that we crashed our UAS a couple days before the fly off and broke our frame, and we couldn't repair the frame fast enough to get to the challenge. But from talking to the winner, we probably would have won the competition. We were able to fly for over 30 minutes. The big challenge there was to allocate weight as much as we possibly could to our power source batteries, and we found a partner company that had a high power density battery that we could operate, and then we implemented a power management system that maintained the power from those batteries for an extended period as it flew. The aircraft did fly autonomously through a series of obstacles that the NIST had for us, and that kind of is what kicked us off. Since then, 2018, we had an emphasis in UAS, but shortly after that, we won our first contract with the Air Force, a small business innovation and research contract relative to position, navigation, and timing in GPS-denied environments, with the vision of a product that we believe there's no real one technology or sensor type that solves that problem of providing robust, resilient, accurate position and time in GPS denial across multiple platforms and use cases. Today, there's a lot of emphasis on the use of visual data, EOIR data for relative positioning for small UAS and other autonomous platforms. But that is not practical in many applications. There are others that use signals of opportunity from emitting static location transmitters, such as cell towers or other terrestrial fixed position sites that emit signals, and based on receiving those signals of opportunity, you can calculate the position of your receiver. We've extended that to the use of other non-positioning low Earth orbit satellites. So things like communication satellites, search and rescue satellites, amateur satellites, anything that's emitting a Doppler, we can utilize those signals to calculate the position of our receiver. We also have researched some. We're talking kind of offline before we started about astro-inertial navigation system, and my experience working on the SR-71. Technologies have certainly changed since the mid-'80s, and we have experimented with some internal research and development for using celestial navigation is another sensor type or capability to be fused with our product. And we've also developed for the Army what we call network assisted PNT, where we can share position information with other nodes that have a what we call secure trusted PNT. And if there's at least one node in your network that has trusted PNT, we've developed a technique for sharing information across the network to enable all nodes in the network to have a reliable position and time. One thing we discovered as we were implementing our systems when we delivered our LEO satellite signals of opportunity project to the Air Force, they had some pretty demanding requirements, one of which was to maintain positional accuracy for greater than 24 hours in total GPS denial. If you're using just LEO satellites, we are very dependent on accurate time for our position calculation. If you don't have a GPS disciplined timing source, such as a crystal oscillator, or a chip scale atomic clock, or something that can maintain your time, you will tend to drift rather quickly. So we needed something more robust than a crystal oscillator, which is the kind of go-to standard in small, low-cost PNT devices nowadays. But with that crystal oscillator, we can only maintain time for about 10 minutes at our objective positional accuracy. So to stretch that to 24 hours, we needed something that's more along the performance of a chip scale atomic clock. Problem with chip scale atomic clock is they're huge power consumers. So even if you get over the cost associated with the chip scale atomic clock, in a soldier application, we calculated we'd have to add an additional 4 pounds of battery to the soldier just to maintain the chip scale atomic clock. So we partnered actually with Northeastern University, who had done some fundamental research relative to ultra low power timing circuits. And we are currently executing a program with the Air Force and just received our first article chip for an ultra low power timing circuit that will provide the precision of a temperature compensated crystal oscillator, but with power consumption less than a crystal oscillator. So that will give us the 24-hour holdover timing requirement needed to meet the Air Force requirement, and is a huge potential market for us just for that product, either as a standalone product in other embedded systems. That's about it for an overview of our product line. We're continuously looking at other related products, but we're pretty focused right now on position navigation and timing. We struggle, I shouldn't say struggle, I don't know if that's the right word, but any startup business or new business or any business in general, you always need to balance focus with innovation and not becoming obsolete. So we're focused on PNT, but we also look for other adjacent opportunities, such as the ultra low power timing circuit. We're in discussions, or we just were selected by the Air Force for a visual aided PNT with enhanced situational awareness. So we have a partner company that makes a visual sensor that can, using embedded AI, detect objects. For instance, on a small UAS, it can detect another small UAS at 3 kilometers in a low light situation. So using that sensor technology is part of our visual aided PNT, using visual SLAM using visual odometry, terrain following, we can maintain positional awareness, but we can also use that same visual data for threat identification and presentation of situational awareness data to the user, such as real-time terrain, 3D terrain mapping, object identifications for things like rocket launchers and tanks and vehicles, down to a tactical level where we inspect buildings and identify entrance and exits and individuals, down to use of facial recognition for actually identification of specific individuals. So all that stuff, even though it's not specifically PNT, is related to. So that's where we do other development and integration capability relative to our products.
So Danny,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
I rambled. Go ahead.
This class that we have right now is focused on the use case or the applications where unmanned system robotic technology can really help achieve critical gains, efficiency gains, overall benefit to existing markets, et cetera. Last week, the class looked at space-based systems and technologies, and that included, things that are in low Earth orbit, things that are in synchronous orbits, really terrestrial Earth orbit, as well as out to deep space exploration and utilizing like deep space network or resupply of Martian efforts, et cetera. The way I see this potentially connecting in is right now we have a pretty high threat profile going on with escalating conflict over in Eastern Europe, with a potential adversary that has the demonstrated capability to take out GPS, if not physically through active engagement kinetically of the satellites that compose our GPS system, but also including potential just interference, right? So the technologies that you guys are working on has potential to overcome the limitations that maybe, or dependency rather, that we have on GPS as a sole localization technology. What do you foresee as far as potential commercialization outside of the DoD environment into the commercial market for maybe whether it's aviation or even into ground autonomy, autonomous and connected cars like we have that are starting to grow the market here in Florida?
Right. So our business case, business plan, by the way, we're just entering a funding round actually next Monday. And it's a very typical question we get from investors and the Air Force relative to our commercialization potential. Right now, you articulated very well the known threat and business case for military application. In fact, a lot of people think about the vulnerability of GPS from the standpoint of actually taking out the constellation or individual satellites or whatever. But you also mentioned the bigger threat that you could Google and buy jamming equipment for less than $50 today. And we're headquartered in Orlando. With that $50 of equipment, we could take out GPS in the greater Orlando area. Wouldn't make for a good day, right? So if you think about, and thank God to currently there haven't been a whole lot of attacks in the civil space yet. In the military space, it happens constantly. Before the conflict, the most recent conflict, you can Google and see all kinds of bad things that have happened to the military in general, has identified resilient PNT in the absence of GPS is one of the top national defense initiatives. It's been identified as one of the top for the past 6 or 7 years. And the reason being is that it is so vulnerable. It was never architected to support the wide uses of today, nor the vulnerabilities of today. So from the military perspective, it's obvious. You're a soldier, you're being deployed. If you don't know where you are, where your assets are, it's not fun. You resort to mapping, hard mapping and compasses, and it's really difficult. From a commercial perspective, today it's more of an annoyance, right? We've all experienced it. You're driving along the road with your navigation system in your card or holding your iPhone, and your navigation system thinks that you're on the off ramp, and you're not. You actually stayed on the road. It's not life threatening. It's an annoyance. In my case, I use the example of my daughter, who's a freshman in college, and my wife loves to stalk her, and she's looking at her cell phone and says, "Oh my God, Mallory's in the lake. She hasn't moved. She's been in. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Should we call the police?" So the good news is it was just failure in her GPS that showed her in the lake. The bad news was she was at the frat house on the lake. So, it is an annoyance from a commercial perspective, but it's getting more and more to be mission critical. For instance, the PNT, a big part of the PNT is the T part. People think about positioning, they don't think as much about timing. So if you have a financial system where a financial transaction is happening, large transactions, large number of transactions, large number of small transactions, huge transactions, a big part of the authentication of those transactions is the timing of the transaction. The time stamp in those transactions comes from the internet, and the internet gets its time from GPS. So if GPS isn't available at the timing source, those financial systems could fail. It's not as much of a problem because the internet is pervasive. GPS typically is jammed in an area, not globally. So that particular scenario is relatively low probability of happening, but it could happen. Critical infrastructure monitoring systems, security systems are all Internet of Things, are all dependent on timing and timing of transactions. Many of them are reliant on either the internet and or GPS for time. If it's in a mobile application and you're not connected to the internet, then you're totally dependent on GPS. And if GPS fails, you will not be able to perform your mission, period. So how do you solve that? Small UAS applications, right now the FAA is still struggling through, how are they going to integrate small UAS into the national airspace? And there's all kinds of rules for beyond visual line of sight and so forth that as of today, progress is being made, but there is no real pervasive full autonomy today, but it's coming quickly. So you can imagine you have a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle with 8 passengers on board, and it's flying autonomously from Sanford International Airport to Orlando International Airport, flying over the I-4 roadway or interstate, and all of a sudden GPS gets jammed. Hopefully they're using some sort of visual aided or some network assisted or some other form of navigation that mitigates that risk of being dependent on GPS. But many systems today are still dependent on GPS. They just don't, it hasn't been, there hasn't been enough of an inconvenience to cause the commercial industry to really react with dollars spent on these devices. So we're leading with military, and we're positioning for growth in commercial as the market grows, as autonomous, as there's more and more autonomous vehicles, as those autonomous vehicles become smaller and smaller. So that's the other part of our solution that somewhat discriminates us, is we have this huge, a really hard emphasis on low size, weight, and power. So our solutions are applicable to an individual soldier or a small UAS. If you're flying around in a small UAS that's less than 50 pounds, you don't want to be carrying around a 2-pound navigation device. So
your products would be well suited for, say, like last mile cargo delivery, where every ounce traded, for operational equipment, that's additional cargo, i.e. money that could be made up.
Yeah, or use of small UAS for search and rescue applications, precision agriculture, insurance applications, inspection, FEMA application, disaster recovery, police inspections and security applications are all applications where those product developers may integrate our solution. So in that case, our customers are those application solution providers. The guys that are doing inspections for insurance industry, and especially as they get more autonomous, right? Pipeline inspections, maintenance systems, building inspections are all things that are ripe for automation or autonomy, and need to be resilient if in fact GPS is not available.
What are some of the pressing technological challenges that you're seeing in this space at the moment?
In PNT or autonomy in general?
PNT.
So for PNT, size, weight, power is once again a key. Application across multiple platforms and use cases is something that's extremely challenging, is why we're focused on a sensor fusion paradigm, where visual aided is fine in certain applications, but if you're at night or you're for some reason not able to obtain quality visual data, or you're flying at high altitude and high speed, visual inertial odometry isn't necessarily the best solution. Use of our LEO satellite capability. Currently, our positional accuracy is about 1 kilometer, with a product improvement plan that when we implement our next version should be sub 50 feet. So it'll be approaching or better than current non-corrected GPS using LEO satellite signals of opportunity. But there's technical challenges there too. The primary one is with our solution, the more satellites we see, the better. The more satellites at greater orbital diversity. So many satellites that we are currently seeing, such as Iridium, are all in a polar orbit. And by definition, the constellation was architected so you're guaranteed to see one satellite anywhere in the world 24 hours a day. Well, our solution is better if you could see 2 or 3 or 4 satellites. So there are other satellites. There are search and rescue satellites. There are amateur satellites, but they're not in constellations. So that's a onesie twosie type thing. So we're implementing a agile receiver that can frequency hop across multiple satellite frequencies and manage those multiple satellites and constellations simultaneously to provide a more accurate and resilient position.
Are you going to look at interoperating with Starlink, with SpaceX's Starlink?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Okay, fair enough.
Starlink is very interesting.
It's going to be ubiquitous, and I mean, it's already from the visual star mapping perspective, it's definitely causing issues on that front.
Yeah.
But to me, that could actually present, if you had a known, say, model of where they all are at one given time, you might be able to use that as another input for your sensor fusion for localization, let alone talk to them too.
Yeah, so the way we implement is a trade secret.
Fair enough.
The fact that we are investigating the use of mega constellations such as Starlink, you'd probably see that on our website here. So that's not a trade secret. And I can tell you that we were just selected by the Air Force to implement such a capability.
Excellent.
Yeah, the downside is it hasn't been funded yet, so keep your fingers crossed for us. But the project was selected for funding if they can scrape together the funding.
Well, I've got one more just kind of pro forma question, and then I'd like to turn it over to the class if you're okay with that.
Sure.
One of the challenges that we see in really just any advanced bleeding edge tech area is staying on top of all the changes, all the new advancements, all the breakthroughs, everything that comes out, and then sifting through the sheer volume of available material and determining what's vaporware, what is just, the like the stuff we're seeing perhaps maybe this week at Exponential, where it's, well, this is our vision, but it's really behind the scenes held together with, chewing gum and baling wire, or maybe it is a fully functional, but it's hard to make that determination. What tools or resources do you use so you can stay informed of, and how do you make the determination of, okay, this is worth investigating further, the hype versus the actual functional
yeah, so that's a really hard question. I use the term posture a lot. So a lot of companies love to posture relative to their capability. And that's good. You got to have confidence. You have to state your assertions. If you don't believe your own assertions, it's hard to implement. But it's hard for customers. It's hard for us as technologists to do that. I don't know how, we don't use any particular tools. I'd say that there's nothing like experience. And for the young kids, I would say, that are in your class here, I'm sure there's some that are more age mature than others, but there's nothing like experience. Ask the questions, ask. And I don't believe anything on paper. So you got to talk to people. Call up the company's customers. See actual demonstration of capability. Get loaner equipment and evaluate it yourself. Now you can't do that for everything. Like you said, there are more technologies and capabilities than any one person can possibly sift through. So just, put them on. I use spreadsheets a lot. I rank order things. I use things like the Gartner, research, use the research studies, and if it's other consultants and researchers have identified technologies. For us, we don't try to avoid that, but us and our partners pride ourselves as being the bleeding edge innovators. So I don't necessarily want to partner with someone that's already established, because chances are their technology was invented, last year, which makes it like almost obsolete. So if you're working in leading edge current stuff, there's risk, and you just gotta interview and talk and get demonstrations and rely on people's expertise and their background as much as their product themselves. We've gotten involved with other partner companies that have really cool technology, but they don't know how to manage their way out of a paper bag. So I guess that's another thing. Don't just, your question is relevant not only to technology, the technological aspects of products and technologies, but also management and regulatory issues and challenges also. How do you keep on top of all the regulatory challenges? How do you how do you ensure that the technology that you might think is rock solid today doesn't go belly up tomorrow because of poor management? So it's not just about the technology, it's about the technology, it's about the maturity of the product, it's about the commercialization potential of that technology. That's one of the things that the DoD is really focused on. They years ago, you've probably presented this chart, Brent, I'm sure you have. Years ago, when I was growing up, 90% of research and development dollars came from the government, came from the military and the space program, with only like 10% coming from commercial. Today, it is totally the opposite. 90% of innovation comes from commercial, and only 10% is coming from military or NASA. So the military is looking at this paradigm shift and saying, how do I take advantage of all this innovation in the commercial space when it typically takes on average 10 years for the DoD to get from concept to putting it in the warfighter's hands? 10 years. When our adversary buys it on eBay and uses it today. So how's the government make that paradigm shift? And so they're really looking at how can they take advantage of these agile companies that are just killing it and putting out really cool technology, but still meet their major criteria of mission success and saved lives, right? They just can't buy a whiz-bang sensor and put it on a weapon system and try it, because if it doesn't work, you could lose a life. The adversary doesn't care. They just put another person behind it. We kind of care. So how do you do that? So one of the ways they're doing that is to focus on commercialization potential. So like we're pretty happy with the progress we've made in winning our fair share of government contracts. One of the major criteria that they ask for now is your commercialization plan and potential. So if you don't know how you're going to commercialize, where you're going to sell it, where's it going to be sold other than in the military, how are you going to sustain over years? Because I don't want to invest in you, and then 2 years from now you go belly up, the government's wasted their money. So that whole concept of commercialization, ability to manage, ability to foresee where your market is and where it's going to go and how you're going to grow and sustain is a huge part of product development.
Outstanding. With that, I would like to open up the floor to the students. Anybody that has any questions for Danny, please raise your hand and I'll start calling on you. I do ask, try to keep it somewhat brief. If you've got follow-up questions, that's fine, but just try not to go beyond a few minutes each. Jason.
Hey, thank you for the presentation, sir. I got a question for you. One of the things that I've noticed lately is the supply chain issues, and I feel like it's going to cause a slowdown in the technology development. How are you guys addressing that issue?
Well, we've been pretty fairly lucky so far, as we haven't been impacted to a great extent. We have recently, I'm gonna expand on the supply chain issue, in that we are now in a global economy, right? So we're dependent on the global supply chain, just not US supply chain. So for instance, our ultra low power timing circuit development, we're having Taiwan produce our chips, and we're pretty lucky to get our first serial production chips produced right on time, and no supply chain issues. Our program is dependent on another round after we make some design changes, and that has now slipped 4 months. So how are we dealing with it? Good question. We're asking for an extension in our contract. Lesson learned, I don't know. I always say lessons aren't learned, lessons are always revisited. So having a second source, having supply chain backups is a thing that most manufacturers, most large companies do as a normal course of business. You don't want to be single sourced through any one thing, so you can pivot. You can, if you can't find it somewhere, one place, you can hopefully source it somewhere else. That typically results in greater cost. And you were seeing that in the economy, right? We have supply chain issues that's driving costs. It's hurting the economy, compounds on itself. How do we address it? I don't know. Good question. I don't have a strong answer for that.
Dwight?
Yeah, so back to the, also thank you for the presentation. Very impressed with what you guys are doing. As far as the satellite constellations that you guys are using, can you use, for example, GLONASS or foreign satellite constellations? And also, does it require some sort of permission from whomever it is that put the satellite up there? I imagine that they're all putting off, I mean, you're tracking their signals. Do you need explicit permission from them to track their position, or how does that work?
Yeah, so GPS is part of a larger group of constellations, GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System. So GPS, GLONASS, Baidu are all, I think there's 6 different constellations that tend to be country affiliated. And there are many companies that produce physical receivers that can receive signals from those constellation for PNT. Most of them provide that service for free, just as GPS is. Some of them will charge a license fee for the receiver. So buying, for instance, you can buy a U-Blocks GNSS receiver, so you can receive the signals from all those different constellations. That receiver cost goes up because they've had to pay a license fee. So it all kind of is constellation dependent, but for the most part, you can think of all those other constellations as being just like GPS. There are some customers like the US government that doesn't like you using the Chinese constellation. So there are others that really don't care. Having that GNSS receiver, which we use in our base product, is a multi-constellation receiver type, provides some additional resiliency in our solution, but so does just about every other positioning system like ours. By the way, our base product uses 3 GNSS receivers, 3 antenna. You mount those antenna 20 centimeters apart, and it allows, and we receive corrected GPS signals from RTK corrections from a ground station. We can provide positioning to within 2 centimeters. And with the 3 antenna, we can provide very accurate orientation of the vehicle. So that's a commercial product. It's already being sold. We actually have exclusive license to sell. We don't manufacture that product ourselves. But we really don't focus on that either, because we really think that the market is the market's almost saturated with providers of that type of product. So we're not going to try to position to unseat Novatel or U-Blocks themselves or one of the other GNSS receiver types. It's not practical for us to try to enter an already saturated market. Is that going to answer the question?
Yes, thank you. And well, actually, so just real quick, so you don't necessarily need explicit permission from the different governments or what be it to use their signals. What
it really depends on the constellation, and I'm not totally familiar with each one of them. Like I said, we just buy the product.
Gotcha.
But I'm pretty sure that depending on the constellation, you have to have a license. And that license enables you to decode their signals, and that's built into the receiver.
Gotcha.
So you as a user don't have to, but the receiver manufacturer licenses that capability and passes that cost on to the users.
Thank you.
Excellent. Jason, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had another question on one of the topics you brought up about the innovation being largely done by smaller companies instead of coming from the actual government itself and sponsor contracts. Do you think that's going to prevent an issue in the future of maintaining a competitive edge for our military?
Oh, absolutely. That's why it's one of the number one challenges that in our national, if you just Google National Defense Strategy, that's one of the primary challenges that are being faced by the military today. How do they stay in front of an adversary that buys stuff off of eBay when it takes them 10 years to get from concept to deployment? And it's going to continue to be a challenge.
And I'm going to provide a link to some resources that discuss that a little bit further, so you guys can.
I want to get back to the other constellation thing just for a second. One thing I forgot to tell you relative to our low Earth orbit satellite implementation. One of the things that the Air Force loves about our implementation is we are satellite and constellation agnostic, and we do not interrogate the signal content at all. So we don't have to have a license. We don't have to use a proprietary Iridium receiver. We don't have to have a license to interrogate the signal content, because we don't. So any satellite that is exhibiting Doppler, and we have a known orbital characteristics for that satellite, we can generate a position based on those signals.
Excellent.
Do you mind-
Thomas.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Jason, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up about that, just to kind of expand on that. What do you think the military is going to have to do to maintain that? If they go to completely going to commercialize buying their technology to get it faster, how do they maintain any advantage at all at that point if it becomes, tradable, unless it's, covered by ITCA or ITCO?
Yeah, there's no simple answer. I mean, they're like I said, they're struggling with that now. One of the things they're doing from a small business, well, their entire portfolio and how they develop systems is changing in real time. And we're faced with it on a day-to-day basis. We won our first SBIR contract in 2018, one of 8 awarded in PNT. There were, I think, 20 or 30 companies that submitted on the topic. This last year, there were over 2,000 companies that submitted, and we were one of 100 that were selected for award, but they ran out of money, so we weren't funded. So, and they usually release 4 solicitations a year. This year, I think they're dropping to 3 solicitations because they just don't have the staff to review all the great ideas that companies are putting in. So they're learning. They're really reacting and trying to learn and figure out how they're going to do that in the future. And then you throw in the problem with cybersecurity and supply chain issues. One of the big issues they have is they buy a product from escAerospace, and escAerospace produces this PNT solution, and we buy some circuitry that's produced in Taiwan, and that Taiwanese, probably maybe a bad example, it's just China. We can all get behind issues with China. How do we know that component that we bought, that's an integral part of our solution, doesn't have some built-in Trojan horse? And we sell that to the US government. So the government for years has had this supply chain provenance requirements, so that large system integrators have to ensure that they know every component of their system, how it's built, and it meets the cyber requirements, and they know that by the time the government gets it, that it's secure and meets all its requirements. Well, how do they do that for a small company like escAerospace? I don't have the resources to go investigate every component that I put in my product. I just can't do it. I can't be agile. I can't be cost effective and do all the things that the government wants us to do. With agility comes some risk, but DoD is inherently risk adverse. So how do you solve that problem? And it's a challenge. It's going to be a continuing challenge for decades to come. Okay, Thomas. Thomas.
Okay, sorry, my connection keeps on dropping out. I just want to make a first real quick comment on the discussion that was kind of starting at the beginning of the webcast. Just again, comment, celestial navigation is alive and well in the Navy. I'm retired Navy, so we're still doing it out there as a backup to GPS. You do mention using amateur radio as far as the low Earth orbit satellites. Are you having, and I think you touched on it, but are you having to update the orbital parameters so you can always track when they're actually going to be available for inspection?
Yeah, right now we get our orbital characteristics from published data off of a website called Celestrak.
Yeah.
That is updated on a 24-hour basis.
Mhm.
So yeah, we update our orbital characteristics on our product every 24 hours.
Okay. And they get their data from NORAD, just if you didn't know.
Yeah, and we're working with our Navy, the project that we're just selected for, but not funded from the Air Force. We have a Navy customer in naval research that is putting in an additional $250,000 for that project, and they have access to an even better database that is we'll have to work through some classification issues.
Mm-hmm. And then,
but yeah, that's definitely something that affects our positional accuracy.
How do you do the updates? I mean, is that something that's part of the package, for lack of a better term? I mean, once it's deployed, or
for our prototype, yeah, our prototype we delivered to the Air Force, we require them to plug in to the internet every 24 hours. So their 24-hour clock is not only relative to our positional accuracy and GPS denial, but we used that, we kind of extrapolated that and said, okay, well, we can maintain for 24 hours, but you got to plug in every 24 hours too. And that at a minimum, that resyncs our time and allows us to download new TLE files. Another element that we're implementing is a closed loop update to the TLEs, that if you have good positional accuracy, let's say that you're working with cooperating nodes and one of the nodes isn't in GPS denial and it knows where it is, you can, in your receiving satellite signals, you can update your own TLEs based on those signals that you're getting. It's kind of the reverse of how we would do positioning. If you know your position, then you can update your own orbital characteristics based on those satellites that you're currently receiving signals. And then you share that amongst the nodes in the network. So that's one of the other things that we've proposed implementing in this next round that we were selected for.
How about the consideration of a disconnected update? In other words, one system downloads the TLA files, put it on a flash drive, sneaker-net it over, and then update it. The only reason why I bring that up, my other background is cybersecurity, so it just rings the red flag to me when you said you connected to the internet to do an update.
Yeah, there's all kinds of use cases. That's a big part of development with the DoD. And another reason why military systems cost a lot is you don't just buy an off-the-shelf something, because that off-the-shelf something might be good for a particular use case. But when you start talking to the military about their use cases, well, I can't use a USB drive, or if it's mounted on a soldier, we got to use the Black Diamond hub for interfacing, and this particular battery and that particular interface and cable, and it's going to be in you have to go check it out at the supply house, and it can't be plugged in, or it can be plugged in, or it's offline for 24 hours or offline for 6 hours. And all those requirements, all those different use cases have to be taken into consideration before you actually implement, build, and deploy a system for the military.
No Bluetooth.
And another thing to think about, just a soldier implementation, for instance. A soldier is a transportation mechanism, right? And in the past, many of these devices are made for a one-off application, and it's just hung on this transportation system called a soldier. The soldier has never been engineered as a system, right? So today, a soldier, Air Force Special Forces soldier carries 45 pounds worth of equipment and has at least 7 GPS receivers hanging off of them in some form or fashion. Why 7? Because navigation system XYZ had to have one, and radio system 123 had to have one, and this other sensor system had to have one. So all these individual unarchitected, unintegrated subsystems were hung on the soldier with no intent to integrate them into one soldier system. Are they ever the good news and bad news of that? The good news is you can continue adding and subtracting and upgrading things. The bad news is they're never going to be totally integrated. And your 45 pounds is going to quickly go to 60 pounds. And the way you solve that is you put robotics movement systems on the soldier that enables them to carry more weight instead of reducing the weight. It's hard.
Well, excellent. As we've hit the top of the hour, does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask Danny while we have him here, or going once? Oh, we got one. Is that John?
Yes, I just want to ask one quick question. Since you mentioned the SBIR contracts and sort of the changing dynamic of how defense acquisitions are occurring, you know, the SBIR contracts, you know, they initially read almost like proof of concept proposals, and then when you start digging into the requirements of the submission, you start to realize, like, wow, you kind of need to have a massive company behind this proposal just to be able to submit. So it's two very different worlds. I mean, the professor mentioned that, you know, in the world of startups and tech, you know, it's a lot of bailing wire and bubble gum, and that works. It's there. Things are fast and they're rapid. And you switch over to even the SBIR contracts, and things tend to get bigger and need to have more proof, you know, like proof of longevity and resilience of the company producing. How is that something, just as a principal in a company, how is that a problem that you all try to solve from sort of a foundational standpoint when you approach a project?
Yeah, so it's easy for us. And it gets back to what I said at the very beginning about posture. I have literally added over $5 billion worth of business to the Lockheed Martin book of business. I personally have worked on the Astro-Inertial Navigation System for the SR-71, the ground station and space segment of GPS, and that the brief that Brent read of my background is just a brief. So I personally can talk as if I were Lockheed Martin. I literally, and I have the confidence, I have the posture for that too. I literally could put a man on the moon. Me and my company could do that. Take a lot of money and a lot of time, but you know, the having that knowledge that myself and my co-founder and our technical staff have that has been acquired through other companies. It's not ESC experience. It's our collective staff experience that enables us to make those assertions. And the government buys it. And the good news is I'd buy it too, because I really feel confident that I could do that. You know, we can, escAerospace has the capability to build these products, to step up to the technology, manufacturing, management challenges. And the reason we can is because of our staff and our knowledge to be able to, if we can't do it ourselves, know enough to partner or acquire the capabilities that can do it. Does that answer the question, or?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Great. Well, with that, let's see.
Know your capabilities and surround yourself with people that can plug any holes that you have. Partnering is a good thing.
That is always sound advice. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and as well as a huge thank you to Danny. This has just been a very informative and enlightening session to help us better understand commercialization as well as PNT challenges in our shared space. Class, remember to receive credit for participating this week. You need to develop just a brief overview for discussion 6 that addresses how our guest organization demonstrates feasibility of unmanned system technology and influences future technology or new services. 2, describe how lessons learned and or observations made by our guests can help make new economic enterprise more viable. And then 3, any new information you were not previously familiar with, including how your overall understanding of the topic has improved. I'm also happy to stay on after and chat if any of you have questions or just want to pick my brain regarding upcoming activities. So with that, thank you, Danny, for coming. Really do appreciate it, and hope.
No problem. It was fun. Feel free to visit our website and drop me an email, and feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. I'll make sure I share all that. I'm going to add all this stuff to our discussion area tonight, including the top of the list will be your guys' website.
And the STTR was just announced in draft. So if you guys want to partner, if you have a great idea that the university wants to partner on, let me know.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, like I said, if anybody wants to sit and chat about, I know this week, at the end of the week, we have your team rough drafts coming in. So now is a great time to ask for any clarification. I know I sent out an announcement this morning, kind of giving a little more detail and a little more overview of the expectation. So now is the time to kind of pick my brain about all that. The other thing is I'm going to be heading back over to Exponential tomorrow. So if any of you have any questions or want me to keep my eye open for something, I can do that. Dwight, I don't know if you popped into discussion 6 yet, but I dropped in a picture of the VBAT exhibit for you in there.
Awesome. Very cool. Right on. Hey, I do have a quick question. What's the coolest thing you saw at AUVSI?
Nothing yet, because I haven't been over to the floor while it's been in execution. I went over when they were setting everything up, so that was all kind of behind the scenes before it hit public consumption. I went over Monday because I'm part of the Florida Peninsula chapter's board of directors, so we had to help kind of get things situated for our kickoff event at Top Flight with a lot of the sponsors and a lot of the companies. And while I was there, I made sure to stop by our booth and check it out, and just kind of put together that video that I left for you all on Monday morning. I'm headed over tomorrow to actually give a presentation on careers and the overall observations from the field. And I'm hoping to spend a couple hours just kind of walking the floor and talking to folks while I'm there. You know, as far as what I've seen to date, it was a lot of just kind of static systems, really interesting ones. I mean, they had some pretty cool group 3 platforms. I saw a lot of hybrid systems, but that seems to be kind of the trend the last 3 to 4 years, is an ever increasing number of hybrid systems.
Sorry, again, so I don't want to hog all the microphone time, but it seems like kind of a fad, right? The hybrid systems, it's really not buying you anything.
Well, for the time being, it's okay. So if multi-rotor is the brute force approach, this takes that to the next extreme, right? It's not aerodynamically elegant in the least bit. When you're flying in, you know, forward flight, and yet you have multi-rotors, you know, just sitting there spinning. Yeah, that's not the most efficient use of resource. But it works for the time being. So, you know, I think it's going to take some more experimentation to get maybe a more elegant option. It's interesting. I mean, you look at something like NASA's experimental platform, the Grease Lightning. That's where the entire wing rotates, right? And it has a bunch of smaller engines along the leading edge. So it's combining multiple concepts into one platform. It's fairly aerodynamically efficient in its operation. The problem with a platform like that is if you get hit with a gust of wind during vertical operations, you've got a much larger surface that's going to get pushed around by that wind. So it's not as maybe effective in that type of condition. Something like last mile delivery of cargo, you don't want to have a system that's fighting the wind that much. So it's not an ideal solution for that. But it's NASA, so they're doing that to just get a better understanding of aerodynamic interrelationship and interplay. So I don't know. I mean, I think as modeling improves, as you know, the technology around this improves, we're going to see more and more capability. The thing that worries me is something kind of Danny got into in talking about just kind of our dependency on China. We have, at least in the state I live in, Florida, we have regulations coming out that have pretty much made it so any public enterprise, firefighters, law enforcement, etc., within the next 12 months, they're not going to be able to use any UAS that are not on the SUAS blue list, which means they either need to be domestically produced or produced by one of our allied nations, like France. The Parrot platforms are on the list, which I understand from a strategic safety perspective, from a national defense, national security perspective. The issue is over 90% of the platforms out there, 90% of the offerings, one of the arguably most highly functional and cost-effective platforms are DJI products. And that's why they have been so widely adopted. They more or less have gone the route of the Apple ecosystem. Everything's interconnected. When you buy in one, you end up having a legacy connection in, and they make it very easy to do that, so that you do end up seeing long-term multi-generation adoption. They're very intuitive, very user-friendly. The problem is once you get that deep into adoption, it's hard to go to another platform. And then to compound matters, this is where it's problematic. We don't have a lot of domestic offerings. 10 years ago, when I came into the multi-rotor market, the SUAS market, multi-rotors are starting to emerge, and we saw really, that was 3D robotics was taking a big lead. Granted, their platforms were manufactured just south of the border. The company was located in San Diego, but they were manufacturing the equipment in Tijuana. But that represents more or less an acceptable risk. since then, we just haven't seen the multi-rotor market take root here for domestic design and manufacturing. This is something we're going to have to start seeing. And we've seen a lot of folks come and go. Intel came into the market. Sony came into the market. You know, it's problematic. It's something about it that they either can't compete with DJI, which there's a number of theories why there. But to me, it's if the US government wants us out of the DJI ecosystem, then they kind of need to provide some funding, incentive, et cetera, to help kickstart our domestic manufacturing of those products. We can't sit here and look and say, well, the Lockheed Martin Indigo is a great option. It's a $40,000 platform. Granted, you get a lot for that money. You get extreme level of documentation and support, which is what you're paying for. But the average consumer can't pay that. Law enforcement can't pay that. Firefighting can't pay that. They can pay $1,500, they can pay $2,000, and they can scale that up to buy 10 units at that price, and they can have a very effective department with now a fledgling aviation unit. But we can't expect them to pay numbers of upwards of 20,000 per unit. It's just, it's going to mean the system won't get adopted or used. So.
Yeah, boss. I've always thought maybe like, let China subsidize those SUASs, and then if you could somehow just nuke all of the software and put source software on it, so that you know that it's not doing whatever they think it is you're doing. But I don't know, just an idea. But thank you very much.
No worries. All right, anybody else got anything or?
Just kind of a take on with that. I've talked to a couple different other people with companies that have had some difficulty in the past, and something that I've seen as far as a consumer base that's been reached out for, especially in my mind, goes back to 2014 kind of being the magical era when you seemed like you could buy something from everywhere, was product support issues. Whereas DJI had continued to support their products, and a lot of other companies, after like a year or two, they came up with a new one, and then they just completely dropped the support for their previous line.
So it goes beyond that though, Ben. DJI had something that 3D robotics started, but then they transitioned out of the market to go more prosumer level. DJI, and they still have this. This is a key component to their success in my mind. They have the user forums, and that is a wealth of information. When you can go to a forum, whether it's Reddit or anything of that nature, and you can find people who are experiencing the same problem that you have, and they can offer up a simple solution or series of things to try, that makes adoption a heck of a lot easier. I mean, you see it really with our cell phones, our tablets, our technology that are part of our integral everyday lives. The ones where people can information share and troubleshoot, they tend to do much better in the market. The technology where people have a lot of problems with it and they can't ever figure it out, they don't last long. And I think you're right. 2014 was about when this stuff started really taking off. We saw the Phantom 2 came out about that time. We were on the cusp of the 3. The Parrot was out. A lot of the stuff was starting to get just a little more mature, a little more consumer friendly. Shortly after, actually, I led some efforts at Embry-Riddle to produce the SUAS consumer guide, which we went and we reviewed about 12 different consumer multi-rotor platforms that were available on the market. And there were just a ton of options, but there was no standardization. There was no uniformity, even in controls. They were all just so radically different. How you started them, with the DJI, pressing in on both thumbs versus other systems were, press another button or go out with the controls. It was just so radically different in so many different ways that it made training with these different systems somewhat unorthodox and hard to tie down. But yeah, we've come a long way with this.
Yeah, I understand that. For example, when I tried to use the ArcBird system, I couldn't find any support for that. So it took me a couple months to actually get things up and operating smoothly. And unfortunately, when I tried to show some other folks about that, it just kind of became useless because anything else they had couldn't directly relate.
Yeah, one of the things we did on our SUAS guide, and let me see if I can find this just to share this with everybody. Because one of the elements we examined was supportability. This technology, this was so old, but it had a good good overview. So if I can find it. There we go. Let me share my screen again. All right, can everybody see this? The SUAS consumer guide?
Yes.
And if you want to look at it, you can find it on uasguide.erau.edu. In fact, I will add this to my list that's going to go on to the discussion tonight. But what we did, we went through just all kinds of stuff, from this tiny little handheld Dromeda Kodo to like a cheap $40 SEMA Venture, all the way up to the Inspire. Where is it? We had the Phantom 3, DJI Inspire 1. And our intent here was to actually look at this in terms of suitability for a novice. So if you had never flown before, what platform would be best for you? And then we also looked at a bunch of other performance factors. But what we ended up with was top score for the Parrot Bebop, which honestly was why we adopted it early on into our SUAS flight training program, was just because of what we scored it here and how we really looked at all the features. But a big element of this was user support rating, 96.33. And what went into that was, let's see, trying to recall, I guess we just summarized it, but we didn't put that much detail. Oh, detailed documentation was provided, and it provided additional material that we could compare it to. So I guess we didn't put the spider chart on here. We had a really cool chart that was like 3-dimensional that kind of outlaid everything relative to each other. But yeah, this still gets me to my point, though, that one of the critical elements of adoption is how well the user community supports the product. All right. Well, anybody else have any other questions before we call it a night? Well, thank you again all for joining, and I really do appreciate it. I hope you're going to be able to join us for the third one coming up in 2 more weeks, where we have Finn Bonsett from VHB Engineering join us. And that's going to be a different look at things, because Finn is on the civil engineering side of things. He is airport planning, development, construction, with a focus on advanced and urban air mobility infrastructure. So what needs to take place in the environment to support the integration and availability of that technology. So, all right, well, I hope everybody has a great evening, and look for the discussion for follow-on. So, all right, good night.
Thanks. Good night.